since the morning about the rise in fuel prices, and I commend him for his artfulness in having dealt with the matter. Mr. Chairperson, all shades of opinion in this House are always one and bipartisan when foreign policy issues are discussed in this House, and today has been no exception. I think even the most trenchant critics of the government are one with the government when dealing with foreign policy issues. There is no question that the non-alignment, which has been the bedrock of our foreign policy for the last 75 years plus, has stood us in good stead, has given us great respect worldwide, has managed to keep us afloat, has managed to keep us deftly clear of many conflict situations wherein otherwise there was a potential for us getting roped in. And I think, therefore, this is a policy that has held us in good stead, and I commend this government for having continued the same policy, even giving credit where it's due sometimes, as we heard the Prime Minister say off and on. The morning television visuals that one sees from Ukraine are heart-rending. There is no doubt about it. I think every heart cries at the kind of massacre that's taking place there. But then all war is about massacres. And therefore, I particularly wish to commend the government for the manner in which it has stood up to the near hectoring by the United States of our position that we've taken, of the nuanced position we've taken, to the point where lowly officials, of course, have virtually openly tried to threaten us. But even the President of the United States has gone to the extent of saying that India's position on the war has been shaky. And I think that's about as strong an indictment as can happen comes from the top quarters of America. But I mean, I find it a bit, frankly, shaky position on their part to give us this model posturing, considering their track record. The first country to have employed nuclear weapons on a mass scale, the first country to have carried on a savage war in Korea first, then in Vietnam, thereafter all through the Middle East, in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, Afghanistan, and those lives that were lost then and the misery that those people went through in those wars, and that absolutely calibrated savage bombing, all-night bombings that we used to watch during the first Kuwait War and the second Kuwait War and the second Iraq War. Those are still very fresh in our minds. So therefore, it ill behoves the United States to morally hector us on the position India has taken. I think there is, though, even in these blurred lines, something that India will have to strongly consider on at least 2 or 3 issues going forward. Number one, that the entire civilized world, and which is the Western world as well as our Quad partners in the East, they've all come together on one platform, and therefore there is some degree of isolation that India possibly has to contend with on that score. And that's a matter of, I think, some concern which I have no doubt that the government is fully mindful of going forward. Secondly, clearly now, the Russia-China axis, with Pakistan being a very minor tail there, but the Russia-China axis now is going to be a formidable axis going forward, with Russia very much a junior partner, very much dependent on China virtually for its existence, because with the kind of savage sanctions that have been imposed, and these sanctions are going to go on for a very long time clearly, they now desperately need China to bail them out financially and economically. And so therefore, China's position in our sphere of the world is going to become infinitely stronger, infinitely more powerful, and therefore we have to now contend with that fact very, very carefully. Thirdly, I think we also have to take into consideration the fact that Prime Minister Modi who has an excellent equation in relations with most of these countries that we deal with. And Mr. Hardeep Puri was absolutely right when he said that the Prime Minister speaking to many of these countries actually entailed some kind of a ceasefire to ensure that Indians were evacuated. And that's quite unprecedented and extraordinary in these times. So therefore, I think there possibly is some also expectation in some quarters that he would go the extra mile in playing peacemaker in these times, that India's position of strength in terms of our track record of ahimsa, our track record of non-alignment, and all the other qualities that our forefathers have bestowed upon us, that we should play with the Prime Minister's muscular diplomatic posturing that has happened over the last 7-8 years, and with good measure. I'm saying this in a positive way, that he should perhaps play a slightly more proactive role. I mean, now that the major part of the evacuation is over, that even for a ceasefire or even for the hostilities to at least come to some kind of cessation, I think perhaps some more vigorous dialing on his part should be in order. There is, I think for India, everybody has spoken about the problem of, give me 5 minutes more? Or
3 minutes.
5 minutes more? Is that good? Yeah. So the problem of almost 22,000 students coming back to India is, of course, a very, very serious and critical issue. Everybody has spoken about it. We need to seriously reflect on how we are going to burnish our own infrastructure in this country to ensure that our children don't have to go abroad for much cheaper education, because we lack for nothing in this country, and therefore for them to have to seek refuge abroad like in this fashion, and then now to come back and be left virtually mid-water is something that we'll need to very seriously consider. And I have no doubt, and this is a very sizable number because there is 40,000 which have come back from China earlier due to COVID last year, and now this is 22,000 more coming back from here. So therefore, the possibility of them being adjusted in various other countries, again, a more aggressive and a more forward-looking policy has to be undertaken by the government. There is, I think, a silver lining also. Mr. Puri spoke about oil prices going up. Yes, that's been happening. It's been fluctuating. But the bigger problem also is going to be on edible oils, etc., that we are importers of. But of course, our exports should start looking up, because now wheat, which was the major export, wheat and corn, which was the major export of both Russia and Ukraine, accounting for almost 25% of the world's exports, are drying up, and therefore this is the time for India to really step up a very aggressive export drive to ensure that we gain something from the ashes of this war in terms of our own domestic economy. Mr. Chairman, I expect the government to very proactively, therefore, while all the government is solidly backed by all shades of both public opinion as well as political opinion in our country. So therefore, they are rock solid on that count. They have held their own so far. But I think going forward, everybody expects, under the leadership of the Prime Minister, for the government to be more proactive, both in the resolution of this conflict, as well as in order to be able to, I think, milk this to our advantage, both financially, economically, and in every other way possible, particularly in the geopolitical context of the fact that the Prime Minister could, and the government could, and the MEA could, and we have a very capable External Affairs Minister who's again had a sterling track record in the ministry. So therefore, under their aegis, if some kind of aggressive policy could be undertaken going forward for a cessation of hostilities, I think that is what all shades of opinion in this House would expect from the government. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I just want to add one sentence. Mr. Naveen Patnaik has, of course, done his bit. There were many ODI students abroad, and I think Mr. Puri will bear us out, because many of them have come back under his aegis, the ODI students, and we've thanked, my Chief Minister has personally thanked him for the effort he's made, and therefore I also would like to say that Mr. Patnaik has done everything he could have to ensure that our ODI children have come back from abroad. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you, thank you, Sri Pinaki Mishra. Next, Sri Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think this has been a very rich debate already, and I know it's going to continue. And I want to really say that a few years ago, as chairman of the External Affairs Committee of Parliament, I had said there is no such thing as a Congress foreign policy or a BJP foreign policy. There is only Indian foreign policy and India's national interests. And I will say to you today that I think all the speakers, even those who have been critical of the government and who will be critical about some aspects, have spoken in that spirit of one nation, one set of national interests, and a very strong commitment to what is being done for India and Indians in this challenging situation. And I do want to assure my friend, the Foreign Minister, that we have all been watching with very close attention and admiration the adroit diplomacy he's been conducting, and at the same time with some concern about some of the areas on which we may have a slight difference of emphasis. Let me say, sir, having said that I'd like to address these remarks and the issues facing us under three broad headings, and I'll be fairly brief on each of them. One is the humanitarian situation and the evacuation. The second is our stand at the United Nations. And the third is the geopolitical implications of this crisis for all of us. Now, if we look at the humanitarian situation and the evacuation, I think there is no doubt that we are all incredibly grateful for the success of Operation Ganga and the return of some 23,000 Indians, mainly medical students, back home to India. And on that, I don't believe that there is any particular demurral. But it is to be pointed out that while we commend the embassy for having begun to register the students in Ukraine early in the process, it is also true that some other embassies were quicker off the mark in getting people out. And I think there's no harm in admitting this. This did happen. The fact that we registered the students was useful. But we did not, for example, have enough domestic transport arrangements in Ukraine. A lot of the students had to walk very, very long distances to get to the border points eventually, and that is something we'll have to bear in mind for future situations. So, if we were to look at the positive side of the ledger, the government was very quick to make excellent arrangements in the neighbouring countries, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, in order to fly our people out once they had got there. But in getting them to those countries, I'm afraid we were perhaps somewhat found lacking. And I'm not trying to diminish in any way the contributions of our excellent diplomats, our hard-working personnel. The Minister was kind enough to hold a consultative meeting of the External Affairs Ministry, a consultative committee meeting, in which he took us into these young diplomats working 24/7, manning the hotline in order to receive calls from students. All of that was very important. But one set of complaints that many students have expressed, including to me personally, have been the difficulties they encountered in getting to the border points where they had to cross. And I think this is a lesson that we need to bear in mind for the future. And of course, we must all pay tribute to Naveen Shankarappa, whose life was so needlessly and tragically lost when he went out heroically to get food for other Indians who were sheltering in a bunker with him. And that, I think, is indeed something we must absolutely, in this House, unanimously pay tribute for. His parents were gracious enough, as you pointed out, Mr. Chair, when you were speaking, to donate his body to medical research. But there's also, I think, some research we need to do on how these situations got to the stage they did, where we found ourselves with so many people there. I will add that one thing that's a bit unseemly, unfortunately, was the publicity mongering that we conducted in some of the neighbouring countries. I got some adverse comments on that. I think it was unnecessary. Our nation would have risen in gratitude, and we don't really need publicity in foreign countries for what we're doing for our own people. That was unfortunate and should have been discouraged. You know what I'm talking about. Well, let's move on, Shaukat. But I do want to mention one more good thing, which I think has not been mentioned by some of the speakers, and that is the timely and appropriate humanitarian aid that India has sent to Ukraine. That was good. I congratulate the government for having taken that initiative. I think we sent something like 90 tons of relief material, no small amount, and that was essential for a country that is going through the hell that the people of Ukraine are suffering. So, broadly speaking, those are some of the concerns that one has in mind. I think it is to be said, however, that there were a couple of unfortunate statements made by people associated with the ruling party during the travails of our people when all of us were getting desperate messages from families and from students. There was one minister, a former chief minister of the ruling party, saying that the students had to be blamed for miscalculating the gravity of their situation, quote unquote. Most unfortunate. We had another minister serving in this government saying that these are merely people who couldn't pass the NEET examinations in this country. Such statements were most unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to say to the government they were also unnecessary. When people are going through terrible trauma, it was a time for all of us to rally together and attend to their needs, as indeed we did eventually. These statements really reflect poorly on the commitment of our nation to our people stuck in distress abroad. Having said all of that, all's well that ends well. The students are back. Now the concern is how do we manage to help them catch up with the education that has been disrupted as a result of this tragic situation, the war and the evacuation. And I think there the government should really do two things. It should take immediate action to see what can be done to have remedial instruction available to these students, ideally in Indian medical colleges. And the second thing they need to do is use the revelation of 23,000 medical students in a country like Ukraine, which even the Prime Minister expressed surprise on, that there were so many there, to realize how badly we need to rethink our approach to medical education. The shortage of government seats. I mean, you realize the NEET is a tough examination. But do you know that of all the children who pass the NEET examinations, only 7% get into colleges in India? They have to go abroad. They have no choice. When COVID happened and we had to evacuate people from various countries, I had medical students from my constituency in the most extraordinary addresses. Places like Moldova, remote corners of China, Kazakhstan, and so on, because, of course, they could not get education. I think the government really has to use this opportunity to take a root and branch look at establishing an adequate number of government medical institutions. We have heard so many promises over the last 8 years that AIIMS will be introduced in every state. My own state has received that promise from 3 successive health ministers. We're yet to see the foundation stone of an AIIMS being laid in Kerala. Let us now move on a war footing. We need doctors very clearly. We have people capable of studying to be excellent doctors. Let's give them an opportunity to do so affordably. So that's here is the first basket of issues, the humanitarian ones. So second, my concern about our stand at the United Nations, which I recognize has evolved in a way that I can today fully support. But I was shocked, I'll say very honestly, at our first couple of statements at the United Nations. As I mentioned to the Foreign Minister, it was not just the abstention. Abstention, there are good reasons why we wanted to signal a certain position. But the fact that in the initial statements at the United Nations, we failed to mention any of the principles that we have stood for in the world for the last 75 years. We didn't mention the UN Charter. We didn't mention state sovereignty. We didn't mention the inviolability of borders. We didn't mention even the inadmissibility of the use of force when it comes to resolving international disputes. These are basic core principles that go back to Nehruji's Panchsheel and before. And these are things we've always stood for. It took a while, but eventually we've got around to it, and we have in our last few statements done this, even while abstaining in the UN Security Council, in the General Assembly, and in the Human Rights Council. Now, the fact is, we have great respect for strategic autonomy. We want to make our own choices, but our choices can sometimes involve standing up for principles. We need not have behaved as we did in the initial stages of the UN. And what was particularly deplorable was that first statement in which we showed a shameful even-handedness between the aggressor and the victim. We actually merely urged both sides to de-escalate. Now, if somebody is attacking you and you're defending yourself, are you guilty of escalation? How can we use language like that? We said that we call for concerted efforts on all sides to return to the path of diplomatic negotiations and dialogue. Well, one side is being attacked. If you don't want to use harsh language against that side, because in the name of your friendship with them, then I think one has to also ask, if we can't speak frankly to our friends, then what is the friendship worth? I think it's very important that we stand up for the fact that in these matters, we can at least have spoken with a certain amount of moral conviction and courage, even while, if necessary, choosing to abstain. And I understand we have a special, privileged strategic partnership with Russia. It goes back a very long time. I myself, just last month, had inaugurated the celebrations of the, whatever it was, 75th year of Indian-Russian diplomatic relations or whatever. And I had spoken very warmly of our warm relation, of our close relationship. It's not something that anybody on this side of the aisle is going to be criticizing the government for respecting. But at the same time, we have to understand that in this particular instance, it is Russia that resorted to the use of force. It is something we have to understand that though we have a long list of IOUs, most of those IOUs on Kashmir and so on, vetoes in the Security Council, are to the Soviet Union, of which Ukraine was also a part. So let's face it, we owe those IOUs to both Russia and Ukraine. And let us also face it, we are indeed a major client for Russian weapons supplies. Our defense systems rely a lot on the weapons we've imported from Russia and on the spare parts we need to service them. But first of all, we pay top dollar for those weapon systems, sir. No one is doing us any favors. The seller needs the buyer as much as the buyer needs the seller. We should not act as if it's always a one-way traffic. Equally, sir, we must understand that when we have a situation like this, when we have, for example, a country that is taking a stand in relation to us, that troubles us and compromises our own relationships, and very directly hurts our own people because of the short-term after effects, the rise in oil prices, the rise in commodity prices. We have some seed, even 70% of the sunflower oil and sunflower seeds that India has comes from Ukraine. That's no longer coming. These are simple examples, but all of this are matters that do affect us, and we should have the right to be able to say to our friends, look, this was not right. This has caused us some pain and difficulty. But finally, I'd say that now our position has been calibrated, our line has become notably tougher, and I want to stress one thing that I'm sure my friend, the Foreign Minister, will want to stress also, except that perhaps he will not be able to do so as openly as I can, which is that refusing to condemn Russia is not the same as endorsing what Russia has done. And that, I think, is a reminder for all of us that whatever India may be accused of, we have not at any stage, through any action or any words, implied an endorsement of or a support of what the Russians have done by conducting this invasion of Ukraine.
Thank you.
Finally, sir, the third set of issues will be the geopolitical implications of what we have seen. In the short term, there is some very worrying consequences, sir. I would say that the Ukraine war has exposed, 3 minutes, has exposed India's strategic vulnerabilities in a tough neighborhood as nothing else could have done, and it's raised some fundamental questions for our security. We had been maintaining a relationship with Russia while developing a strategic partnership with the Quad, with the US, Japan, Australia and India. Suddenly the 3 Quad members have taken a very different position on Ukraine from what we have. We are somewhat out of sync with them. We have scrambled to keep them on side and to show some understanding of our position. And so far I commend the diplomatic efforts of our government that we have been able to keep them on side, and they have signalled an understanding of India's position. At the same time, there are some real concerns about the larger implications. We are seeing Russia and China getting more and more close to each other, and if Russia is weakened as a result of this misadventure, which it almost certainly will be, then its weakening can only give China the upper hand in that relationship. A Russia that becomes essentially a subordinate state of China is a major concern to us in India, sir, because we have, as recently as 2 years ago, lost 20 of our Jawans in Ladakh to Chinese aggression. And in these circumstances, the neutralization of Russia, or even Russia coming along with China, is a matter of grave concern to us. And there is the sideshow of the Chinese-Pakistani relationship. Prime Minister Imran Khan was in Moscow the day the attack began on Ukraine, and he went through with his meetings anyway. He continued to do so. What does this mean? Are we witnessing the emergence of a Russia-China-Pakistan axis that we have to think about? Yes. At the same time, sir, there are some opportunities. We've had some, I think, a record number of ministers have visited Delhi in the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure the Foreign Minister was a very busy man receiving all of them. And that's a very good sign, because it suggests that there is an area of opportunity for us. What is that opportunity? It is the opportunity to leverage not only understanding for our position, but also to go beyond our traditional reluctance to choose sides on matters in which, frankly, it is sometimes necessary to take a stand. We cannot sit on the fence all the time, Mr. Chairman, sir. I think it's important that we listen with open ears to these distinguished visitors who have come. We don't have to take any lectures from them. None of them has the right to tell us what we need to do. But at the same time, Mr. Chairman, I think it's important that we, instead of bromides about the need for diplomacy and negotiations, why don't we try and take a step forward and offer ourselves in a mediating capacity? Why can we not perhaps reach out to both Moscow and Ukraine and see whether this is something the Israelis have been doing, the Turks have been doing? Why not India, which prides itself on a good relationship with both the capitals, try and play a constructive role in this area? So I just want to conclude with a quote from Jawaharlal Nehru way back in 1946. He said, "India, constituted as she is, cannot play a secondary part in the world. She will either count for a great deal or not count at all." I urge our Foreign Minister and our government, let it not be a case of India not counting at all. Let us count for a great deal, let us stand for our principles, let us respect our strategic autonomy, but let us at the same time go forward and try and play a constructive role in bringing about the peace that we have so far given rhetorical support to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Darurji. Next, Doctors Farooq Abdullah ji.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After a great diplomat who has served the United Nations for years, it's a very difficult thing for me to speak. He spoke very well, and his English is beyond me anyway. First of all, I'd like to start with, it's a failure of the United Nations. United Nations continues to fail this world. It failed, as Tarur said, in Vietnam. It is still failing in Korea. It has failed in the Middle East. And I don't think, I personally, over these years, have any hope from that organization. First of all, I would like to thank not only the Prime Minister of India, but all those ministers who he chose to go to that war-torn country to bring our children back. And I must say, at the cost of their own safety, they took this journey and brought those children back. I congratulate you and I congratulate the Prime Minister for this bold step. But also at the same time, it's very easy to say that we should play a mediation role in a condition today where two major powers, America and Russia, are at loggerheads. So why did it happen? Russia continued to tell Ukraine, please don't have enemy round my border. I hope my members will remember when, at the time of Khrushchev, they put missiles in Cuba. Kennedy was the president of America. They had to remove because America felt the threat of those missiles. Today, Russia feels the same way. I think they told this country, very frankly, please be neutral. We have no difficulties with you. They also gave them some aid before that, many millions of dollars. Stay free. But they still chose to join NATO. No doubt, it was there. It is a free country. They could choose. But Russia felt threatened. This we should not ignore. And I think, under those circumstances, when you say that any country, how about us? When you think of China and you think of Pakistan, now you're telling that Russia will also join it. Are we not afraid? Are we not worried that our forces will be tremendously at pressure to defend our integrity? That is what that country felt. Now, the way forward. Question is, all this happened. Millions have moved out of their home. Many have died. And God knows how many are yet going to be taken out of the soil. How do we move forward? Let's forget, it's over. The war is there, it is still there. But how do we now comprehend of saving whatever is left? so that the war comes to an end and the world comes to a position of surviving. Today, the world is not surviving. You see our neighbor, Sri Lanka. Look at the position there. I hope we don't have to go through that situation in this country. Therefore, it's essential that the war must end. How do we end it? All right. Now, you said diplomatically. Is there a diplomatic chance? I remember Trump said, America first. Why is India not thinking India first? If it is not in India's interest, this war, then I think to the foreign minister and through him to the prime minister, I would request, we must take major steps. Major, not small steps. Major steps in de-escalating that war, finishing that war. Unless we do that, you will not be able to tell future people that India played its part. India is a neutral country. India never took sides. Though Russia gave it, the only country that the Russians gave when our ambassador was D.P. Dhar, and they signed an agreement which they have signed with no one, that war on India will be war on Russia. Never forget that. And therefore, what we must remember, that if we want to save friends, because we have got friends in America, we've got friends with Russia. We're not enemies of any of these countries. And that is one of the biggest things that country has achieved from the Nehru's time. Whatever one may say, it was the Nehru's foreign policy of keeping neutral with friends from all sides so that we could move forward and take this country from poverty to the developed country. Therefore, my request to the foreign minister would be, sir, please move faster so that at least people will say, Gandhi's nation has saved this world. And thank you, sir. God bless you.
माननीय अध्यक्ष जी, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद है। यूक्रेन और रसा की लड़ाई क्या है, हम एक मिनट में बहुत बेसिक, जब दो भाइयों में अलगौझा हो जाता है, बीच में दीवार हो जाती है, और अगर एक भाई गुंडे बदमाश को बुला के बैठाने लगे अपनी तरफ, तो दूसरे भाई की चिंता होना बहुत स्वाभाविक है। यही है, यहाँ गुंडे बदमाश के रूप में मैं नेटो को बोल रहा हूँ। दोनों पहले यूक्रेन वाज पार्ट ऑफ रसा, दोनों अलग हो गए, तो अब ये नेटो का मेंबरशिप लेने के लिए यूक्रेन जो तैयार हुआ, तो इसका मतलब हुआ कि रसा को खतरा हुआ। वहां पर नेटो कंट्री का जिस दिन नेटो का मेंबर हो जाएगा, वो वहां उसकी तोपें, मिसाइलें सभी लग जाएंगी, तो जाहिर है कि रसा का चिंतित होना बहुत स्वाभाविक था। तो लेकिन फिर भी अगर अपनी सिक्योरिटी को लेकर के चिंतित हो और किसी देश पर आक्रमण कर दे, ये भी जायज नहीं है। तो कम से कम, भले ही हमारी पॉलिसी रही है, हम नॉन अलाइंड रहे हैं, दोनों तरफ हम किसी ब्लॉक के मेंबर नहीं हैं, फिर भी चूंकि रसा ने यूक्रेन पर आक्रमण किया, तो इंडिया को उसकी कम से कम निंदा तो करनी ही चाहिए थी, कम से कम करनी चाहिए थी, तब भी हम नॉन अलाइंड रह सकते हैं। क्योंकि समाज के सामने, विश्व के सामने एक कुछ दिखना भी चाहिए कि हम एक पुराने, कहते हैं कि सनातन विश्व गुरु रहे हैं, और एक ऐसा नरसंहार एक देश द्वारा दूसरे देश के लोगों के साथ किया जा रहा है, ये ठीक नहीं है। इस पर तो आवाज जरूर उठानी चाहिए थी। दूसरी बात कहता हूं कि जो इंडियन स्टूडेंट्स थे वहां पर, तो ये तो कोई इंटेलिजेंस फेल्योर नहीं था। महीनों से रूस की फौज लाखों में वहां जम रही है, टैंक भेजे जा रहे हैं, तोप भेजे जा रहे हैं, आर्मर्ड व्हीकल भेजे जा रहे हैं, और रूस के स्टेटमेंट से अखबारों में महीनों से आ रहा है। ये बहुत भांपना बहुत जरूरी था कि लड़ाई होगी, और लड़ाई होने के पहले हमको अपने देश के बच्चों को जो पढ़ रहे हैं उनको निकाल लेना चाहिए था। ये हिंदुस्तान की सरकार को करना चाहिए था, जो उन्होंने नहीं किया। हमेशा क्या है, एक कहावत है ना कि प्यास लगने पर कुआं खोदते हैं। यही इन्होंने कोरोना के समय किया, यही ऑक्सीजन के समय किया, और यही यहां भी किया। अब 20,000 लड़कों को निकाल करके इतनी अपनी छाती ठोक रहे हैं। मैं बताऊं, मुझे याद है जब इराक वार हुआ था तो यूपीए गवर्नमेंट थी, 1,70,000 लोगों को निकाला। और भी एक दो लड़ाइयां हुई थी, जब उसकी इजराइल हिजबुल्लाह की लड़ाई हुई थी, तब भी इंडिया ने अपने सिविलियंस को निकाला था। लेकिन कभी आपने देखा कि कोई मिनिस्टर जा करके वहां पर इसकी निकालने की वाहवाही किया हो? मेरा कहना है कि ये करते कम हैं, कहते बहुत ज्यादा हैं। हमारी जो इंडियन एम्बेसी के लोग हैं वहां यूक्रेन में, दे हैव लिमिटेड रिसोर्सेज, लिमिटेड मैन पावर, कुछ लिमिटेड नंबर ऑफ ऑफिसर्स। वहां जब 1, 2, 3, 4 मिनिस्टर जाएगा, हमको इस चीज का फीडबैक है। इन लोगों को नहीं कहेंगे वो। माननीय अध्यक्ष जी, मुझे मालूम है कि कैसे यूक्रेन के जो एम्बेसी के लोग कहते थे, ये लोग आकर के मुझे तंग कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि सबके पीछे प्रोटोकॉल देना पड़ता है। उनको गाड़ी दो, उनको रहने की जगह दो, उनको ये दो, उनको ये दो। इन्होंने वहां पर जाकर के किया क्या इंडियन एम्बेसी के लोग यूक्रेन में जो बैठे हैं, क्या बेवकूफ हैं कि उनको इवैक्यूएट करने के लिए वो कुछ नहीं कर पा रहे हैं? मैं पूछना चाहता हूं, जितने मिनिस्टर गए हैं, सब ने उनकी ड्यूटी में उनको व्यवधान किया है। एक मिनिस्टर अगर बता दे माननीय अध्यक्ष जी कि जा करके इन्होंने क्या सहयोग किया, क्या मदद की इंडियन स्टूडेंट्स को निकालने के लिए, तो मैं अपनी बात वापस ले लूंगा। केवल एक मिनिस्टर बता दे कि वहां पर जा करके इन्होंने क्या मदद की है? हाँ, क्या मदद की बता दें। और देखिए एक चीज, अरे सुनिए, मेरी भी बात को सुनिए। मैं कोई लिखा पढ़ा नहीं भाषण बोल रहा है। मैंने जो समझा है, जो मेरी आवाज है, वो मैं बोल रहा हूं, और आप मुझे दबा नहीं सकते। चाहे जितने लोग चिल्लाते रहें, और मैं बोलता रहूंगा, आप मुझे बता नहीं सकते। लेकिन हाँ, वैसे सुनिए जी, वैसे अरे हम सभी लोग जानते हैं कि यूक्रेन का जो प्रेसिडेंट है मिस्टर जेलेंस्की, पहले एक कॉमेडियन था। वो एक मैच्योर नेता नहीं था, लेकिन इतना पॉपुलर था कि उसका प्रेसिडेंट हो गया। अब जब जान रहा है कि हम रसा से बहुत कमजोर हैं, तो उसको फौरी तौर पर कुछ निगोशिएशन करके, कुछ डिप्लोमेटिक वे में रास्ता निकलना चाहिए था, समझौता करना चाहिए था। हजारों लोग मारे जा रहे हैं। इतनी बड़ी बड़ी बिल्डिंग, अस्पताल, सैन्य ठिकाना, माल, सड़क, आप देखिए टीवी में, कितना खूबसूरत कंट्री लगता है। देखिए, एक देश का मामला दूसरा है, इंडिविजुअल मसला दूसरा है। अगर आज हमसे कोई टकराए तो मैं कहूंगा कि मैं सीना तान के खड़ा हूं, मैं झुकूंगा नहीं, गोली मार दूं। लेकिन जो ये सरकार का मामला है, आज अगर नेटो, यूरोपियन यूनियन, वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज, सारे देश मिल करके अगर वार क्राइम में भी पुतिन को पकड़ें और उसको फांसी भी दिला दें, देखिए अगर उसको, जो कि दूर तक कुछ नहीं कर पाएंगे, तो क्या यूक्रेन का जो तहस नहस हुआ है वो वापस आ जाएगा? ये सोचने की बात है। तो मैं तो माफी के साथ कहना चाहता हूं कि जो यूक्रेन की लीडरशिप थी जेलेंस्की की, इस मामले में उसने सीना दिखा कर खड़ा नहीं रहना चाहिए था। उसको समझौता करके इसका रास्ता निकलना चाहिए था। और हाँ, हम मोदी साहब की बड़ी हर मामले में क्रिटिसाइज करते हैं, लेकिन इसमें तारीफ करते हैं कि जेलेंस्की को भले वो थोड़ा जैसे वो क्रीमिया ले लिया है, ऐसे थोड़ा और देता रहता, कुछ बातचीत करता रहता, जैसे मोदी जी थोड़ा दे रहे हैं।
आपके दल के एक मान्य सदस्य और बोलेंगे,
जैसे जी, मेरी बात सुनिए
जी।
मैं आपके माध्यम से, माननीय विदेश मंत्री जी भी बैठे हैं, और बहुत चैलेंज के साथ कहना चाहता हूं कि जितना टुकड़ा टुकड़ा करके देश का हिस्सा चाइना को देते जा रहे हैं, ये केवल उसी पर लड़ाई रुकी हुई है। और ये सुनिए, और ये हम तो यहाँ कहेंगे कि इसमें डिप्लोमेसी है, इसकी तो हम तारीफ करते हैं। जिस दिन
आपके दल से एक और माननीय सदस्य बोलने वाले हैं, प्लीज
अपने गिरेबान में झांक कर देखिए कि आपने हिंदुस्तान का कितना हिस्सा दे दिया है। अभी 2-3 साल पहले देखते थे ना, वो इंडिया के सैनिक चाइना के सैनिकों को रोकते थे कि आगे नहीं जाने दे रहे हैं। उसके बाद टीवी से ये खत्म हो गया। उसके बाद किसी ने पता करने की कोशिश किया कि क्या हुआ। चाइना जितना लेना चाहता था, सड़क बनाना चाहता था, चाहे उसका हिस्सा रहा हो, चाहे भूटान का रहा हो, चाहे इंडिया का, सब पर उसने सड़क बना लिया, सब पर कब्जा कर दिया। और फिंगर टिप्स के बारे में तो आप जानते हैं, जो वहां पर अभी गलवान घाटी में जो झगड़ा हुआ कि हम कहां थे, वहां से कहां चले गए।
जी।
और पिछले सेशन में ये बीजेपी के एमपी तापिर गांव साहब ने कहा कि वो 50 किलोमीटर क्या 100 किलोमीटर भीतर घुस आया है। तो आप सच्चाई से मुंह नहीं मोड़ सकते। आप इस मामले में सुनिए, इस मामले में लड़ाई बचाने के लिए कर रहे हैं, ठीक कर रहे हैं। जब
ठीक है, सुप्रिया जी, ठीक है, नाम हट जाए, ठीक है। जी, बिल्कुल, कोई नाम जरूर बोलिए। सुप्रिया जी प्लीज, नथिंग इज गोइंग रिकॉर्ड नाउ। हाँ, सुप्रिया जी, उनका कोई चीज रिकॉर्ड में नहीं जा रही है, आप प्लीज।
Thank you, sir. I speak on behalf of the Nationalist Congress Party in this 193 on the Ukraine and Russia situation. So there is no glory in the battle worth the blood it costs. So I take this thought forward, which Sumati, my colleague and friend, mentioned earlier, that nobody really wins a war. It's only war widows, children who are orphaned many times, and mothers who just have people telling them that your son was a brave son who's never going to come back. So it's a very, very painful situation. The television that we've been watching, the media reports that are coming, it's a very, very painful times I think the world is watching today. We have to take sides. We are judging people what is right or wrong. But truly what is really right in any war is something I've never understood. I would like to thank the Ministry of External Affairs and the leader who leads it, Sri Jaishankar ji. And this is the second time I'd like to thank him for the COVID intervention that his entire team did. I think was just most wonderful, and I think the only thought that I have in mind as a Member of Parliament is gratitude towards your department, because in the most challenging times during the COVID, MEA was one mantralaya that all you had to do is just tweet, and within minutes, I mean, people sort of thought that it was flattering for us. They thought we were so influential in India that we could actually help people all over the world. And I think we got a lot of blessings thanks to you, but we won't forget to pass them on, because they actually deserve at the MEA doorstep, not as ours. We are only agencies to do that. So this department and the entire team globally has done wonderful work during COVID. And then came another situation, which was this Operation Ganga. Operation Ganga, I do understand, it has its moments. And Dr. Tharoor has spoken extensively about it. But I don't think we should even forget all the airlines who helped us. I mean, it's unfortunate that India doesn't have its own airline anymore, but all the Indians came together. It was not about who owned the airline, whether it was private, whether it was government, but everybody unitedly supported it and brought all our children back. But I think the only disappointment for me, I mean, it was very, Dr. Abdullah also said that it was very, very brave of the ministers to go. Even I felt that when I saw all the ministers there, and I used to wonder what their families must be going through. It felt almost like you sent a soldier to war on a border, what his or her family go through. But clearly they went. But I think the disappointing scenes for us, which I really didn't want to criticize, because they had done such wonderful work. Had one thing you had not done, this was actually a fast shot, which had just gone flawlessly for you, is the jingoism that came at the end of it, which was very painful because you had done such wonderful work. Unfortunately, I didn't see you doing it, so there was hope for me in this government that one of my most favorite ministers didn't do it, because he really showed dignity and class, because we are not doing a favor to our children by bringing them. Bacche hamare, लाना हमारी जिम्मेदारी है, and they are our children, they are not yours and mine, and everybody's children study abroad. My son studies abroad now, my daughter is aspiring to go abroad, so there's nothing right or wrong कि जिनको कम mark मिले इसलिए भागा. I think it's very, very unfortunate to judge our children. Children look for opportunities, and here at globalization we can't say कि जो भारत में पढ़ेगा वही अच्छा बच्चा है, जो परदेश में गया उसको कम mark मिले. I think these are very unfortunate, careless statements, and we in this house must be very, very respectful and make sure that we don't make such statements, especially at such times. But this Operation Ganga went out exceptionally well. I remember a mother. I would like to put his Vandana from my constituency. Her son is becoming a doctor because he didn't get the marks, didn't get the admission. She would call me every day and cry. She was a helpless mother who was running from pillar to post. Ki koi mere bacche ko theek se laye. And then he was walking. They were doing everything to help each other. And the MEA was very, very kind. And I'd really put our gratitude on record for everything that you have done for our children. What I would like to highlight in this entire discussion is the Russian military imports, and in the foreign policy, we constantly talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, how are we going to take this relationship forward with Russia is something we'll have to introspect, because a lot of times what happens is we are dependent on them. It's wonderful to be Atmanirbhar for any human being and a nation. So even in defense, when we take programs forward, this last week I had the opportunity to ask this question to the Honorable Defense Minister. There are a lot of Indian companies. There's one company which happens to be in my own constituency, Bharat Forge, which really wants to work in defense exports and making India Atmanirbhar. So do you think we could work better, because the whole world is changing? Is this new word which has come, that the new order world? I think it's a new connotation we've all come up with. So new world order. So the new world order, are we going to rethink all this? And we will very soon have to react and see how indigenous companies' products need to be brought out, and all our Indian companies to be helped to, I'm not saying we stop buying from Russia, it's not something, or any other country in the world, but in the Atmanirbhar scheme, what more and what intervention would you like to do that? Talking about human rights, a lot of, even the Honorable Home Minister yesterday talked about human rights, and it's of the person who suffers is the human rights we're talking about. I appreciate what he said yesterday, but today, even if we are pro-Russia or pro-whichever country in the world we want, today what is happening in Ukraine is unpardonable for anybody. What have those children, those women done that they are paying this price for? You see women with guns. It's not something, I'm completely against the gun controls. Why should anybody need a gun? Guns are to be kept by the government. Why do citizens need guns? So how are we going to address this issue? We talk about genocides. This is a genocide. So what are we going to do? How do we bring in more peace with more dialogue? What can India's role be to protect both the nations and stop this genocide? It's just to see helpless citizens running. And are we going to talk about Russia's aggression as well? And I'm not saying this, our relationship is wonderful, but even if we have a good relationship with somebody, if there is something which we feel is not good, I think it's our moral duty to raise it. Everybody's talked about India's relationship with Russia. I'm so glad, because this entire session, all we heard is bad things about the first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. But today, this is a great opportunity. I think life is a full circle. That today, we are praising Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and that's the legacy. Legacies don't just come from parties and organizations. These are the legacies that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has given us, and that's where India is starting. And this entire debate is from a relationship where he stood and where he's brought India to, and it's the same foreign policy where we are. Especially, I'd even like to put it on record, it's not just the Russian foreign policy, but even for what we did with America, I would like to put it on record that Dr. Manmohan Singh ji, when we had the nuclear deal with America, it was Manmohan Singh ji who led that dialogue, and how our relationship with Russia, with America, all superpowers, we have done exceptionally well as a country. And I still remember Sushma ji, Arun ji, everybody supported it because it was in the larger interest of this nation. I still remember President Bush saying, if Dr. Kakodkar approves of, we will sign it. It was on a lighter note that showed how deep the relationship was of trust. So I think that's something we need to definitely discuss. Just one small point I'd like to raise is that the Honourable Minister talked about oil. And